All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first in our Career Pathways series. This one is on careers in the social impact and corporate social responsibility field. Just for all of you, just a couple programmatic notes. We have you all on mute, just given the large volume of folks that we are going to have on our call today. I also ask when you, if you'd like, go ahead and click on the speaker view option for your screen. So then that way you don't have like a gallery of like all these tiny, Brady Bunch pictures. And I totally just dated myself when I said that. But go ahead and pick on the current speaker and you should be able to see whoever is speaking at any one point in time. A little bit about how today's session is going to go. We have a number of fantastic panelists, all of whom are alumni. So welcome back, folks, to our virtual hilltop. We have Phil Deering today, who's a 2015 college graduate, who's the co-founder of Second Day. We have Sheri Chung, who's an SFS 2016 graduate, who's a manager at Propel Incorporated. We have Phil Wong, who's an SFS 2015 alum, CEO and co-founder of Misfit Foods. And we also have Patrick Drown, who's SFS 2017, and he's an analyst at Resonance Global. And kind of fun fact is these folks all knew each other when they were on campus in one way or another. So they're all friends. So hopefully this will kind of feel like, being a fly on the wall as some friends get to chat about their careers in social impact and corporate social responsibility. So before we get going with them having a chance to introduce themselves, I did want to say, kind of address a little bit of the elephant in the room, that I know that the news over the last few days, in addition to what's been going on with COVID, may have a few of you online wondering, or maybe feeling even that, thinking about career or what you want to do at the next point in life may feel a little bit, out of tune or out of touch, or maybe even selfish, given everything that is going on in the world right now. And I just wanted to say that I think what is really important when we think about career and why it is important is that, when you're students at Georgetown, yes, you're gaining a set of skills and everything that you can take on into whatever your next step in life is. But even more than that, you're being trained to be persons for and with others. And that doesn't necessarily just mean in one type of career goal. Like whatever your career goal may be, you can really have an impact in how our world will be in the future by the small choices that you make day to day in your career, through the problems that you face, through the people that you interact with, the little things that you stick up for. I was thinking a little bit about it, and the quote by RFK came to me about the ripples. And he said that each time a person stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he or she sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. And crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. So when we talk about career, I think that, as you consider your journey and how you can bring the Jesuit values of being a person for and with others into your career, now really is the perfect time. And I think today's panel is really a great example of that. Social impact and corporate social responsibility takes these institutions that sometimes have a negative connotation, market capitalism and the free hand of the market economy can sometimes be seen as an enemy against things like justice. And instead, the alumni we'll be talking to today have really done quite the opposite and have flipped that on its head and have been able to really find these ways that they can help contribute to the greater good by using some of these institutions and taking what is good about them and bringing them to bear on some really, really tough issues. So with that, we wanted to turn it over to our panelists. And so we hope you enjoy the conversation. We'll be having a Q&A following their introductions. And then we'll be giving you guys some instructions as to what is next. All right, so Patrick Drown, if you want to kick us off.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me be part of this panel. It's an honor and a delight to be with all of you today. I'm just going to briefly share what my career has been like since graduating from Georgetown. I graduated in 2017 from the School of Foreign Service in Culture and Politics. And throughout my time at Georgetown, I've always been interested and curious about international development, specifically economic growth, but wasn't really sure what that meant for me, what that meant for a career. So after graduating from Georgetown, I did a program called Princeton in Asia, where I worked in Nepal for a year on small agriculture and water related projects, which is a great opportunity to kind of get a better understanding of what this field of international development looks like. What is a donor funded project? Kind of how does it operate? It was a really great year of learning for me. And after that, I've come back to DC, and I now work for a company called Resonance, which is a small business that mostly implements projects for USAID. For those of you who might not be familiar, USAID is United States Agency for International Development. So it's the part of the government that does all kinds of different development projects related to agriculture, education, health, and all kinds of different sectors. Currently, I work on a project that's jointly funded by PepsiCo and USAID on women's economic empowerment in agriculture. So it's been a really interesting and difficult journey, especially in the past year for me, as I've been maybe familiar with a lot of donor-funded projects like USAID, but now have also started working with larger corporations like PepsiCo to try to understand where some large donors kind of interact with larger companies and where some of their interests are aligned. So that's kind of a little bit about me. It's exciting to see all of you here today and interested kind of broadly in social impact, whether that's in the US or abroad, or trying to figure out what that means for you.
Great, thank you. Okay, next, Phil Wong.
Hey everyone, good to see you all, whether faces, names, or otherwise, and thanks so much for having me. So my career's been, I think in a lot of ways, both narrow and in other ways wide. I graduated from Georgetown in 2015, School of Foreign Service. I was a STEAM major, so Science, Technology, and International Affairs. And I actually started the company that I'm working on right now, Misfit Foods, when I was still a senior at Georgetown. So it was in a house in Burleith that I actually shared with Phil Deering. And I say that my career's been narrow in the sense that I've been at the same company, working on the same company for the last 5 years, but it's been wide in the sense that I think my understanding of how a food business could have impact has really transformed during that time. So for a little bit more background on Misfit, we started off trying to fight food waste by making cold pressed juice from fruits and veggies that farmers couldn't sell otherwise. And after a couple of years of working on that product, we realized that we frankly never really achieved, quite the demand that we needed to scale the company. And so pivoted in 2018 to focus, still on climate change, but through the lens of reducing meat consumption. So now we're making products that combine meat and veggies to help consumers eat less meat without going meatless. And so, it's been a really rich last 5 years. Have taken me from DC to now New York, and looking forward to hearing perspectives from the other folks on the panel, as well as all your all's questions.
Wonderful, thanks, Phil. Sheri, let me.
Cool. I'm Sheri. I'm just so excited to share with all of you a little bit about what I've experienced kind of trying to have a social impact career. So I graduated in 2016. I was in SFS, studied international economics, and I was involved in a bunch of different things that were related to entrepreneurship or social impact while on campus, like some of those being Startup Hoyas and the Beck Center. I ended up going to Venture for America And I was at a nonprofit based in Cleveland that was focused on improving digital literacy and digital access in the area. And I spent a year there kind of working on data analytics. And then I wanted to work on something that was a little bit more broad, national, and like particularly a product, and just be a little bit more in the tech space. So I ended up finding Propel, which is a company where we make an app for people who are on SNAP benefits. So basically helping them to check and manage their balance and then find other kinds of like resources through their app. And so we currently serve over 3 million Americans who are on SNAP benefits. And I've been at Propel since 2018. I work on strategy and ops, and one of the most recent projects that I've been working on is our partnership with Give Directly. As part of coronavirus response, we've been doing a cash transfer of 100 million to 100,000 families in need because of coronavirus. So that's some of the things that I've been working on just recently.
Okay, great. Thank you. And now, last but not least, Phil Deering.
Yeah, totally. What a delight. Thanks to Elizabeth for organizing this. I love this. And it was such a delight to see Phil Wong working on his food products in my kitchen over senior year. That was a treat. I'll say, one thing that I've worked on, and you can note across all of the four of us, is that the hardest part of a social impact career is actually the first step. That bridge is really broken, and once you like really are in it, it's easier to pivot and figure out what you want and what works and what doesn't. But actually getting in there is the hardest thing. And so I think it's interesting to note the different ways that each of us have gotten into it. For myself, I when I graduated in 2015, went to work for Bridgespan, which is a nonprofit consulting firm, and I really loved it. It was comfortable. It was fun. Got to do sourcing for large foundations to figure out who to invest in food security, housing, criminal justice, things like that. Did strategic planning, growth plans for nonprofits. Did impact investing diligences, trying to look not just the financial return, but how to quantify the impact return so they were seen co-equally. And all kinds of interesting work. I took 6 months off while I was there to work for College Bound Dorchester, which is in the Boston area, and they do a bunch of community-based organizing and programs there, and help to transition from their really broad base. They had senior programs, they had early childhood programs, to double down in Boston Uncornered, which is their sort of signature program that the CEO really wanted to go all in on. And so help to transition their programs there. And then over the last 2 or so years, I've been working on Second Day, and this, is why I love so much that I'm on this panel and have the opportunity to connect with you all, because what informs and grounds that mission is exactly what you all are thinking and grappling with, which is it is really hard to build an on-ramp into the social impact sector. When I was a senior, felt totally lost, felt not equipped at all to understand which organizations were good to work for, which weren't, how to even think about getting into it besides just, sending off applications blindly. And so, I was fortunate to land with Bridgespan and start there. But if that hadn't worked out, I genuinely have no idea what I would have done. So with Second Day, we run a fellowship for college seniors to help connect them with nonprofits and social enterprises, doing great work, and help them to onboard into the sector. So happy to talk more about that. But living more into the social enterprise work has been challenging and interesting and invigorating, and yeah, it's great.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for kind of sharing your careers in a nutshell. I think a couple of you touched on this, but I was curious to understand from your perspectives, looking back, what were some things that you did at Georgetown, whether it's maybe a class you took or a club you joined or a group that you were a part of, that you think best prepared you for getting into the social impact business, and why?
I'm happy to. Oh, sorry, Sheri, go ahead.
Okay, well, I'll just go. Yeah, my quick thing is I think that there was a ton of stuff that I did that I found really interesting for understanding the social impact space, and kind of the startup space as well. And so some of those I mentioned, like Startup Hoyas, Beck Center, you know, I also, the Center for Social Justice. But I think one thing that was really formative for me and was also really helpful actually in getting into my current position, when I was an undergrad, I started a student organization, Georgetown VITA, which was focused on volunteer income tax assistance. And so getting students to go volunteer at different places across the city. And I think this was, for one, it was like an opportunity to go out into the city and like get to know people and do something for others, which I think is just so important. And like often in the Georgetown bubble, direct service volunteering is maybe not like top of mind, but I think that was really important for me, and I wanted other people to be a part of that. And then I think it also, I learned some valuable lessons from kind of navigating the Georgetown bureaucracy to like get the organization started and like recruit people and all of that, that I think helped me with developing some grit and some focus. And I think when I actually did talk about that as kind of something in my background that was like a little bit entrepreneurial, which when, you know, for my company, I was the first business hire and the 9th person to join. And so I think when you're looking for someone to join such an early organization, you want to find someone who has like an entrepreneurial bent. And so I think that actually, like, if you have opportunity to try new things and try to start things or do something like that on campus, I think those can be really valuable experiences to kind of form some of those skills that are helpful.
Anyone else?
I'll just share one thing. Thanks, Sheri. I think that maybe for me, any kind of engagement where I was exposed to any kind of like social justice or social impact issue, I think allowed me to start thinking more critically about what is my own place to, or what is my own position in relation to all these social justice and social problems that exist in the world, whether that's in DC or abroad. And just, I think the more that you're exposed perhaps to social issues, then you kind of allow yourself to think more about what kind of career or what kind of role that you can have in your future, you know, related to those issues. So whether it was through programs like in the Center for Social Justice, like I was involved with the After School Kids program, or even just studying abroad where you're in a context that's different from your own and you're able to think critically about how are things different from, you know, your own experience at Georgetown, I think is all really valuable and critical, I think, to developing your own understanding of what your own role in social impact can be.
Yeah, I'll just hop on that as well. I mean, Georgetown is amazing because, you know, I also started a club that was really formative for me. Doing alternative breaks was an amazing way to build the capacity to learn and bring humility to social issues that I wasn't grounded in. And great opportunities with clubs and classes and small groups to just build the soft skills of leadership. There's nothing like it, which is why people pay insane amounts of money to go to great schools like Georgetown, because it is truly a way to form these skills in a way that other ways don't as effectively. So leaning into that, you know, across the board, the times when I was upset and uncomfortable were the times where I learned the most. The only other thing I will add is there was a tipping point for me junior year where I went from only doing campus things and almost thinking of professionalized work settings and social change as like selling out. And I had this aha moment between sophomore and junior year where I realized like I couldn't just like throw rocks at the system. If I was going to be in rooms where I could make a difference, I'd need to take on some pre-professional internships and, you know, build the professional skills, whatever that meant. to be able to get access to the places I want to get access to. And so I'll just name that as well, that if you have the ability to, and you know, a huge problem with the social impact sector in general is that so many of the nonprofit and social enterprise internships aren't paid. So I wouldn't take an unpaid one, but if you can find a paid one, like that's an amazing opportunity to grow and learn and build your skill sets that you can get the road.
Great.
I think for me, I don't have that much to add because I think I have quite a bit of overlapping experience with what some of the other folks have said. But when I reflect on how I was making decisions on what to do at Georgetown, it was definitely focused on kind of articulating my how to be in social impact. When I think the most actually impactful experiences are around like kind of discerning a why. And so, you know, I don't think it's a coincidence that for me, those two experiences were like Alternative Spring Break, which is now called Alternative Breaks Program, and then GU Impacts for the Beck Center. And so, you know, both of those obviously took me off campus, Alternative Breaks Program to New Orleans and to Chattanooga, and then GU Impacts to Rwanda. But I think it was really those experiences that kind of, as Patrick mentioned, were critical for me kind of evaluating my place in the world and certainly how I wanted my career to align with that.
So this is all really exciting because I love what you are all mentioning about, you know, you're talking mostly about the things that you've done outside of the classroom. So I was hoping that, you know, what I'm picking up on is also a thread of, you know, I'm hearing a little bit, even though none of you named it, a little bit about the Ignatian values that, you know, you see when you're a student on the posters all over campus, and maybe you pay attention and maybe you don't, but I'm hearing a lot about service and the different places that you guys all served when you were on campus. So could you talk a little bit about, you know, was there an Ignatian value or something that you kind of learned while you were at Georgetown that you've really taken to heart in your career, and how do you apply something vague like a value that we have, and like what does it look like day to day in your job?
I can go. I don't think this is a Jesuit value, but I think maybe it's like a Jesuit theme of some kind. But I feel like at Georgetown, I think that the idea of reflection, which I know is like a very big thing for Jesuits, I felt like I was involved in activities that emphasize reflection at Georgetown much more than anything before I came to Georgetown. And I think I've brought that with me leaving Georgetown, which I've really valued. And I think the active reflection in terms of understanding what are my own goals, how does like my current career or position relate to my own goals, and like taking time to think about that has been great. But then also thinking about the programs that I've worked on, it can be easy to get caught up in just, you know, delivering, you know, what your work plan is for certain projects, but trying to be reflective about, you know, is your approach working? Is it not working? How can we engage other stakeholders, or maybe change our direction to, you know, be to meet the spirit of, you know, what our goal is more effectively. So I'd say reflection is, you know, one of my main takeaways.
For me, I think Cura Personalis is something I just heard so much when I was on campus. And, you know, I think I had at least like a notional understanding of what it meant, but I think in some of the most challenging times of my career in the last 5 years, it's like that has really rung true for me. And I think specifically, I started Misfit with one of my best friends, Anne. And so, you know, as 21-year-olds, we really grew up together, both professionally and personally in a lot of ways, you know, as best friends and also as business partners. And yeah, there was a time now about a year ago when Anne was having a tough time with her mental health and wanted to take a step back from Misfit. And I think during that period, us just really grounding ourselves in this idea of Cura Personalis in what was just like, yeah, a really, really difficult and confusing time was that was instrumental, and I really carry that with me to this day.
Yeah, I'll just add, I love Patrick and Phil both what you've talked about, and yeah, these values of discernment and reflection and grounding in the why is one big piece. And then I guess for me personally, I'm not Catholic, but my Christian faith is something else that really grounds me in the work. And I think seeing all of the men and women for others and Cura Passionalis and Ad Maiore, Dei Gloriam, like thinking about like what that means in terms of being of service and seeing all of humanity as part of God's world. Living into that conviction is saying, like, how can I not work on these issues in some way every day when I've been given all that I've been given? And a speech by a Jesuit when I was a senior in high school was what convinced me to come to Georgetown along that theme, and it ran throughout Georgetown, seeing and being inspired by people rolling up their sleeves and saying, what can I do to make the world a better place? And holding to that conviction that what one of the main things that we can do to live out our life with personal values, with Jesuit values, is to be of service to the world and try and create a more just world. So I love that Georgetown is a Jesuit institution, that it has a stake in the ground with Jesuit values, that we don't have to come up with our own totally abstract notions. We can say, look, here's a starting point for me to build off of.
I think I just want to echo all of what's been said. And I was actually reflecting on this, and I have one anecdote, which is I took comparative political systems with Father Carnes my sophomore year, and I don't remember much else about the class, honestly, but I think at the very end he said, the statue of John Carroll faces outward, and the reason for that is just as he faces outward, like everything that we've learned here is not just for you to keep on the hilltop, it's for you to take and like spread out to DC and beyond. And I think that was really powerful. And that really frames a lot of what I was thinking at the time. Is like, we're learning a lot here, but like, what can we take to the future, and like what else we're doing to really spread like what we've been able to learn and like the values that we have, and share that with others. And I think that was just like kind of defined some of how I've really thought about my career afterwards.
That was all really inspiring and really interesting to see how you all kind of took away different pieces and have used it to ground yourself. I know often with career, having whatever that, I think Phil, you used the phrase, your stake in the ground, like knowing that before you enter into a world of work is really important, so that kind of who you are and what you do or don't want to do. So the next thing we'd like to do is we would like to open up to questions from students. I'm sure all of you have quite a few questions. We're going to be doing this through the chat function, just given the amount of participants we have on the call today. So if you have a question, please feel free to use the chat function, and either I or my co-host Patrick are going to be monitoring it. We're just going to take questions as they come up in order. And if we don't get to it, we will email out our panelists later. So if you do have a question, go ahead and open up the chat function at the bottom of your screen and type it. In the meantime, while we're maybe getting some inputs, kind of thinking about values and kind of what's top of mind right now, I was curious what your thoughts, panelists, are in terms of the diversity of the field of social impact, and what who you think are companies that are doing a good job, or what your individual companies are trying to do to ensure better diversity and inclusion within your organizations or in the field at large.
I guess I'll start. I think this is obviously a difficult question, and I think my company faces unique challenges in this, in that I think the social impact sector, or particularly when you look at like the nonprofit side, I think there's a little bit more diversity. But then when you look kind of at leadership or like nonprofit CEOs, for example, you don't see as much diversity represented there. And then for us, you know, we are also a tech company. And so in tech, I think there's challenges with diversity that we all know about. But I think we're very committed to like working on that and always having that be part of our conversation. And particularly in the events for this week, my company is setting aside time for all of us to have discussions about what's going on. And there's a match that's being done for any donations that the team wants to put forth. The executive team is going to match. So I think it's really important that, you know, there's a lot of commitment to action. I think some of that is like encouraging active participation from all of your employees, which we've done a lot of on the diversity question. I think that's really important. And then the other part is like encouraging everyone to feel like the company is really theirs, and that's like something that they can shape. And I think when it comes to that, then it makes it easier to kind of bring in and attract more people to the company that, you know, have come from all different backgrounds.
Yeah. I guess, you know, second day, we only have 2 full-time employees right now, so harder to speak to our organizational policies, but I have many thoughts on the sector, mainly that it is terrible and horrible, and anyone who is actually trying to design a system that was solving social challenges would never design it this way. Depending on the survey you look at, like 80 to 90% of nonprofit CEOs are white, 80 to 90% of nonprofit board members are white, and when you look at it, that's largely because about 90% of millionaires in the U.S. are white. And you know, one of my favorite thought experience that I love to give so there are, you know, some interesting good initiatives that you know, do try and, you know, create more inclusive cultures and build out the talent pipeline across all different types of people. But what drives me crazy is that very rarely actually trickles into leadership. And when you look at you know, people of color led organizations, their fundraising totals are almost always drastically lower than white led organizations due to implicit trust, due to communities of network, given the racial wealth gap, given all these different things. It's pretty insane and frustrating. And a person generally wants to build and design an organization that solves for challenges that they are familiar with, which is why we have so many organizations that skew towards issues that traditionally privileged communities might have more experience with, and other issues become much more neglected. So I'll pause on my rant there just to say there is so much more that needs to be done. If our goal is actually to create a sector and a world in which problems are solved, we don't need the lower ranked organizations. We need the leadership of organizations to be led by people that have personal experience with these challenges. And the only way we're ever going to do that is critically looking at funding models and power dynamics, and who becomes an executive director and why they become an executive director. And as long as you have the majority of nonprofits reliant on connections with white government officials and white millionaires, like there's no way that that's going to change. We need open source government. We need different structures. So I will stop there. That wasn't really actionable. That was more of an rant. So.
Oh, Phil, that's great. And I'm eager to hear what the other panelists say, but it kind of does get to our first question from Karen, who mentions like the challenge of knowing what organizations are good to work for, or say organizations that actually walk the walk as well as talk the talk when it comes to diversity and inclusion or any other issue. She asks, how can you determine to what extent an organization does fulfill the mission, or perhaps has that culture that you're looking for? And I think I kind of heard, Phil, you mention a little bit about like looking at the organizational makeup and looking at the leadership and looking at who's funding. I'm curious kind of what your all thoughts are on Karen's question. Like, how do you tell if the organization really does stand for what they stand for?
I mean, I'd say these are two really tough questions. To echo what Phil had said, I mean, the international development industry, which I was like part of this broader social impact space, is like incredibly white. And I think the company I work for especially needs to do a much better job at thinking about diversity and equity, especially in their hiring practices. I think there are a lot of both especially in the international development space, who think that they need to hire candidates who have all of the qualifications right off the bat to start a job, instead of looking for candidates who maybe don't have the same kind of experience that other candidates have, but have the right potential and ability to grow into a role. I think I've seen that be a really big challenge in the development industry, especially in terms of how do you know which organizations like contribute to the missions that you want to contribute to. I mean, yeah, I mean, I would say look at what they're doing. Look at most NGOs, or whether it's a business, list what their projects are, and I'd say try to understand like what the depth is, how much money are they contributing towards a cause relative to maybe their entire net worth, or their entire revenue. I think you should go with your gut in this more than anything as well, though. Like, I think if a company comes off as kind of like phony, then they probably are. And I think I've seen that a lot of times. Like, I mean, this is a really easy example, but like last night when I was watching Hulu, there was like this Amazon ad saying like Amazon is so grateful for their workers, and we're like providing PPE to our workers. I was like, okay, great. Like, what about their like workers' rights beyond PPE? So anyways, that's just, I'm not saying that you shouldn't work for Amazon. I'm not trying to make like I'm not trying to make a judgment either way. I'm just saying like, it's whatever feel you can get from an organization or company. I think, you should really pay attention to that.
Yeah, I think I would just echo that in saying it does really depend on like your own views. I think even within my company, so we actually do work with a lot of big companies, like Amazon included, and people have different opinions about, our relationship with different types of companies, or like which ones we should work with. I think it's totally a spectrum. There's no like this is like exactly what would be socially impactful versus not. So I think there's a lot of gray area, and it's up to you to kind of feel like what the line is for you. I think that, some things that I look at really, because I think it's hard to have a lot else, but like really look at the people that you're going to work with, and particularly your manager. And you can get a really good sense for like where their head's at from that. And then I think the other thing is like how ambitious, or like how, is the organization using all of their resources at their disposal? Like, what is their growth trajectory? Like, how are they planning to tackle the challenges that they're laying out? So for me personally, for example, there's some foundations where like the law is that you only have to kind of like use 5% of your endowment. And then there's a lot of like foundations where that's like the extent to that they do their grant making, and they're not going really above that. And I would think that that's maybe not an organization where I would feel comfortable at, just because of the disparity between like how much impact they could make and like where they're trying to be in that particular year. But it may be different for other people. So I think it just really depends on you. And then you have to kind of look at like, where is this organization trying to be in 5 years? And like, if you're working at that organization, like, where are you going to be, like what is the impact they're going to make in 5 years? And like, how honest are they with what they're trying to achieve there?
I think for me, there were kind of like there were two key things as it related to assessing organizations. I mean, one is that I think I had a really strong community of peers at Georgetown, but I didn't really have a strong community of mentors. And I think time and time again in just interacting with folks out in the world, like a lot of the people who have had the most interesting and fulfilling careers have had very nonlinear careers. And so I think it can be difficult to have the imagination to understand how those things can come together. And furthermore, just to like ask basic questions, right? I think from where I was sitting as a college student, it was hard to understand what the right things to be asking even were. So would definitely encourage everyone to, honestly just find even a Georgetown grad who's working in an organization or a field that you're interested in, and to just get a sense for what the right questions to be asking are. And, I'm more than happy to be that resource to the extent that I might know folks who are working in organizations that are interesting to you. And I think the second thing is like, obviously this is just like, it's an extremely challenging time to, figure out what to do with your career as Beth mentioned in the beginning. And so, going back to my first point, like I wouldn't put so much pressure on yourself to make the right decision with your first job, because I think the fact of the matter is, a first job is a first job. And when it's your first, it feels really like the most important thing that you could possibly decide. But, I hope that everybody on the Zoom call is at the start of a very long career. And so your first almost certainly won't be your last.
All right, thank you. And also kind of to jump off of what Phil is saying, I know that I think all our panelists today have active profiles on Hoya Gateway. So for those on the call who haven't checked out Hoya Gateway yet, it's a website where you can connect with other Hoya alums, and you can search by graduation year, you can search by key terms, you can search by even like your major or your school or city, and see what alums are there working. And everybody on the call today does have a profile on there, and they all said they are happy to talk with you. That's part of why they're here today. So for the future, know that you do have that as a tool to connect. And right now, while everybody's teleworking and everything, we've heard that alums have been very active on the website, more than I'd say in a typical time. But to our next question, actually, there's two questions that are kind of related. One is from Sarah, and she asks, how do you explain the practicalities of pursuing a social impact career to parents who may be expecting you to pursue a more traditional career path? And I think perhaps hidden in that question is another question from a student, and that has to do with the stereotype of a social impact career, that it's low paying. And how can you balance that desire to have a secure and comfortable paying job with wanting to do and accomplish good? And perhaps to what extent you can help make that case to parents or other, I'll say, influential personalities in your life.
I mean, I would just
a stumper.
I would just jump in and say that if you're thinking about kind of the field of social impact broadly, that's such a broad field. Like that can encompass so many different things. And so I think because the field of social impact is so broad, I don't think that necessarily means that you're going to have a low paying job. I think the chances of having a really high paying job are maybe significantly less, but I don't think you should, choosing social impact, I don't think necessarily means that you're going to have, you're going to like barely get by, for example. I think social impact can mean like working as part of like a social enterprise. It can mean working even with like internationally, like I am, or there are just so many different options. I don't think you should get stuck on, I get like the possibility of having a low paying job. But I mean, and then to the second question, I would just say that I've often found that if you find something that you're passionate about, you'll be able to really excel at it. And so I think if you're drawn to something within the social impact space, and you can excel at it, as you likely will if it's something that you really care about, then I think that's like really such a compelling argument. I think, at least for my parents who've always wanted me to be able to excel at whatever the field is that I choose.
Anybody else have any tips?
Well, so I'll add a couple thoughts. So first of all, you can ask like, why did you send me to Georgetown? Like, what did you want me to do? I mean, if you really want to be a little punchy, you sent me to this amazing Jesuit school where I'm grounded in the highest ideals, and now I'm trying to follow them. That's depends on your relationship. That's the punchier thing. The other piece would be, bring data to the conversation. So let's say, you go work for a nonprofit or social enterprise, and you're making $45,000 a year. You're not making $80,000 a year like someone that goes to a big for-profit consulting firm, or $100,000 per year like someone going to work on Wall Street. But $45,000 a year is I just looked this up, it's in the 93rd percentile for 23-year-olds in terms of income. It's in the 54th percentile for overall age. And that's like a very reasonable salary to get working in social impact. I mean, something like AmeriCorps is going to be 18 or 20,000, which, is actually a real conversation around like, is this a thing that I can make work financially? But I guess I would just counter and say, this is a real career that I can be pursuing. I care passionately about this, and I can excel, as Patrick was saying, and do well in this space, both for myself and for the world.
Yeah, I think I would agree that there's a spectrum, but I think the floor is not maybe as dire as some parents might make it out to be, as Phil was kind of saying. I think this question I find interesting because I don't know if I was like, did I ever decide to pursue a social impact career? And I think it was just kind of like, I kind of just was always interested in particular questions about how we can, for example, make the financial system work better for people of lower income, or how we can make tech work for more people. And I just kind of ended up doing, this by kind of chasing those questions. So I don't know that I ever decided to like pursue a social impact career. It's just like I've always wanted to work on something that I found interesting. And I also don't really necessarily feel like this is forever, to the point of having a lot of jobs. Like I still feel like, if I decide at some point that, hey, I want to go and like get an MBA and go do something else or whatever, like there's still a lot of optionality with that. And I think that, people underestimate like how many pivots they can make. Like I have peers who are starting now to go to med school or to go to law school or whatever. And there's like certainly time for you to go try something for 3 years and go make a pivot, which I think a lot of people, I certainly didn't think about that when I was 22. I was like, yeah, I'm going to find the one thing and I'm going to do that. And then like when I'm 30, I'll be like extremely successful in it or whatever, which is just, I think, a little bit like not necessarily how it goes for everyone, and maybe like a naive standpoint. So I think, you don't have to feel like you're even choosing, like I'm choosing a social impact career now, and like that's going to mean X in terms of money. Like there's so much variety and there's options to try something else or do something differently if you find that it's not going to work for you. So I think don't worry too much. I feel like I haven't given you much in terms of how to explain it to parents, but to be honest, like my mom, I don't think she has any idea what I do. And that's kind of just, that's kind of fine as well. So.
Yeah, I really don't have much to add other than that. I think everyone's parents and everyone for that matter has slightly different priorities. And so I think one thing that's consistently been powerful in kind of like talking to my parents and others as well is social proof, which is to say like, for anything that you want to do out there, there's surely somebody who's done that for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and has done so in a way that would really appeal to, whoever your stakeholders are, whether it be parents or otherwise. So I really think that idea of, you know, it can almost seem uncool to like look at other folks and say, hey, I want to be like them. And that's something that I certainly shied away from, but I wouldn't underestimate the power of that. And especially when dealing with, with parents.
Thank you. And I think another thing too, and we don't often talk about this at the Career Center, you know, a lot of focus tends to be on salary, but when you're looking at any organization out there, you know, looking at what are the other things beyond salary that they're offering in terms of benefit packages. And, you know, there are organizations out there that allow you to bill like volunteer time, and you volunteer so many hours and you get so many days off. Or, you know, I worked at a firm where they had, you know, yearly volunteer days where you dropped everything and you would go and volunteer. And yeah, it was, you know, it wasn't a big thing, but it was something that made you feel like you were at least contributing. And also like very practical things like what is the amount of time off you're getting, or what does the work-life balance package look like? You know, and, you know, having gone through a couple of different jobs, nothing really like, when you do good work and you feel like you are giving back, you know, it's a lot easier to go to bed at night and put your head on the pillow and be, you know, content with the impact that you had, regardless of the cash flow coming in. Although cash, I know as many of you students are like looking at maybe having student debt to pay off, you know, money is a real factor too. So that's where it has to be a balance. And that's where sometimes parents, as much as they can give us a hard time, sometimes parents have gone through that themselves, and they can be a good sounding board too, as you're trying to weigh the benefits of, you know, pay and other benefits versus other maybe non-tangible goods as you face your career. Sometimes parents can help be a good sounding board. The chances are they've gone through some version of that discernment themselves, even if they might make a different choice at the end of the day than what you are. It can be helpful. So I did have one other question before we go into our next activity, and that is, what is something that you wish you had known before you went into this field of work? Or was there anything that surprised you that you wish someone had told you about or warned you about? And it can be a good surprise as well as a bad surprise.
So, oh, go ahead, Sheri.
Oh, well, I just had a quick thing, which is, I think sometimes I think it's important to think about like the impact you want to make, but then also like the role. And I had a little bit of a struggle finding like roles or whatever, because I think I thought a little bit less about particular skill sets that I wanted to bring to bear on a particular problem, rather than like, okay, what do I want to solve? And ultimately it was kind of, I think, my skill sets, or my skill with like data analysis and some of that proved a little bit helpful and distinctive from some other people who I may have been like competing for the role with. And so I think like, and sometimes like when you really get into the weeds on some of the things that you're working on, the like impact of what you're doing is a little bit far. Like we have opportunities to talk to users at my company and like sit in on user research interviews, but those days are kind of few and far between. And like, I would say a lot of my days actually, I mean, I am like, you know, like typing in SQL queries or staring at an Excel spreadsheet, like, or writing emails. Like, to be honest, that's maybe a lot of the work. And so you do have to think a little bit about like, what skill set are you comfortable exercising like from day to day? Because I think that is just something that is kind of a part of the work, and it's not really all about the mission like every single minute, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. I guess what I'll add is, when I was graduating, I think I was a little bit fooled by a lot of the norms I was hearing on campus around jobs with like exit opportunities. because I guess it made me start thinking of a career as a conveyor belt, where it's basically like I go to a job, they tell me what to do, and then I get promoted, and then at some point like someone gives me a different job and I do that in like more of a passive frame. And what's blown my mind being like whatever 5-ish years out of school is the diverging paths. Like most people, they leave and they have an entry level job, and like at the end of the day, entry level jobs aren't that different unless you're like Phil and making juice. Like they're generally like fairly similar. And what like has created a massive gap, even just 5 years out of school, have been the difference between the people who are like passively just like sitting, doing the job that is assigned to them and just sort of like waiting to get promoted or waiting for someone to tell them what's next, versus the people that like go out and try and make it happen and talk to new people and you know, ask for new things at work, or take a risk and go into something. Like I think of my friend who graduated Georgetown the same year as I did, went to work at Oracle in a sales job that he hated. And so he quit and he pivoted into the impact sector. And now, you know, he's worked a couple jobs. He's the chairman of the board of directors of a local nonprofit. This is like 5 years out of school, because he's a guy that talks to people and leans in. He got on this board. He started caring. Suddenly he was doing more work than anyone else. I think there's just this huge gap between, you know, him who's leaning into it and other people who are, you know, still at their first job saying like, hey, I'd love to be in a board of directors if someone like comes out of the sky and tells me that, you know, they'd love to have me. And that's just not how the world works. So
I'll just add that I feel like when I was at Georgetown, I used to feel like the older I got, the different kinds of paths I could take were narrowing and narrowing. It's like I chose to go to Georgetown, so that would narrow a certain amount of options. And then I chose a major, and that narrowed a certain amount of options. But I honestly feel like after graduating Georgetown, I honestly feel like as my career progresses, it's like the options are truly endless. I honestly feel like as I work on new projects, I learn about like new topics or new things. And I'm even surprised at myself at how new areas or new topics that I didn't realize I was interested in previously, I find that I'm suddenly interested in. And I think that's just to say that when you enter any industry or field, there's so many unknowns. Like you can't possibly know how many unknowns there are in a particular industry. And then once you enter that industry, the revelation of understanding all the different directions you can go in is, I think, quite exciting. So I think when you take your first job, don't really think that you're going to be in that industry forever. And two, like, don't think that, you know, you're on a predetermined kind of path, because I think the different directions you can go are limitless.
I think for me, the biggest surprise was just how generous folks are with their time, with really no apparent reason as to why that might be the case. So like one of our values at Misfit is to be a perpetual student. And I think, you know, the roots of that are like we started Misfit knowing nothing about the food industry. And so anything that we do know is really, you know, from having cold emailed people and asked them how to do one thing or another. And, you know, I think this is certainly true of students, but also definitely true as young professionals. Like, take the opportunity to send an email to someone you don't know. It's not that hard to find folks' emails these days. And to just take, you know, 30 minutes, an hour of their time to, you know, ask about their career or their life or whatever you'd like, really. Because I think that's been a really source rich of learning and has opened my eyes to a lot of opportunities that I just wouldn't have even had the imagination for if I hadn't talked to those people. So we definitely take the opportunity to learn from, you know, anyone around you who you can.
Okay, great. So it's 5 o'clock, and at this point, for everyone on the line, we're going to do something a little different. You've probably done this in your classes, but we're going to go into breakout groups, and we're just going to divide up into 4 rooms. And I see a question that I think will help us guide our conversations. So each of the panelists is going to take a room. And so I have a question here that's kind of getting into the, like, how do you have insight as to how your specific area of study at Georgetown may have contributed to your career choices and opportunities, and trying to understand, you know, the impact that that could have on selection of a major or minor and the skills that students are hoping to earn. And before we had this call, the five of us met and we kind of chatted about some of the skills that they learned that are useful in their field. And we talked about two in particular, and those are what are termed in business as a growth mindset. And that is really, you know, are you the type of person who, when you're faced with a problem, you're willing to learn what is necessary to address that problem? And it means going above and beyond just the question given to you, you know, being able to seek out answers independently. You know, I see this a lot of times with employers, like being given a task, and instead of going back to your boss and being like, oh, how do I do this? Going and figuring it out for yourself, and then coming back with, you know, maybe you failed completely, but you can at least show that you've tried. So growth mindset is kind of the attitude that encapsulates that idea. And the second thing is teamwork. And our panelists said this to me, which I hear from you all in my meetings, is that Georgetown is a competitive place. And it is often you against your peers, whether it's you against your Georgetown peers or peers at other schools. You're competing for places. You're competing for jobs. You're competing for internships. You're competing for spots in clubs. But when you get to the work world, you're all in it together. And so true teamwork can be a little bit jarring coming from a really high achieving academic environment. So what we're going to do in these breakouts is we're going to both talk about like the experiences that the panelists have had with these two areas of growth mindset and teamwork. And then also they're going to hopefully help lead you through some discussion about how can you identify opportunities you've already had at Georgetown that are examples of these behaviors, or maybe you haven't had a chance to show those opportunities. So what kinds of things could you be looking for, whether it's through classes or through some of your extracurriculars, to help develop those skills so that when it is time to look for that job or that internship in social impact, you have something you can tell a story about to a potential employer. So we're going to go ahead and divvy up into our groups. So bear with us as we do that. And yeah, and then we'll come back very briefly at the end to kind of close out. And yeah, thank you. Okay. All right. So I'm just making sure that everybody has one of our panelists in the room. Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm going to send out the notes, so please accept it and enjoy your conversations. I'll be here if folks need anything. Okay, Linnea, I'm not sure if you're still on the line or not, and Joaquin, check and see if you folks can join the breakout rooms. Feel free to send a message if you have a question on that. So, all right, welcome back, everybody. We hope you were able to have a good conversation with our panelists. I did want to open it up through the text or any reflections from students or panelists, anything that you think others would benefit from hearing. You can feel free to use the chat function, or panelists, you can feel free to pipe up.
I mean, I'll just say that I always I'm always amazed by Georgetown students, and I feel like everyone in my breakout group was excited to think about what they can do during this quarantining period, and their thirst for endless learning. So kudos to them. But I mean, I guess I'd say like this is also a very strange time to be anyone in the world, especially someone thinking about your career growth. So don't feel like I don't know, allow yourself to pause and be reflective, and don't feel like you have to be so productive or career oriented, at all times of your Georgetown life, especially now.
Any other thoughts? All right. Well, on behalf of everyone at both the Beck Center and the Colley Career Education Center, we wanted to thank our panelists. So I know there's like the little clap function icon that you can put up there. So thank you, the four of you, for coming in today and chatting with our students. Students, I know some of you are in our courses. So I'm going to be sending out an optional reflection sheet that you can return to me. I'll also be sending out a survey within the next few days as well, to try and grow from this, as we hope to do more programming like this in the future. So just keep an eye out for those, and I'll include there too the links to our speakers, Hoya Gateway or LinkedIn profiles, wherever it makes most sense. But thank you, Patrick, Phil, and Sheri, for coming with us today and sharing your wisdom and your advice. And yeah, everybody take care of yourselves, stay healthy, stay safe, and yeah, definitely, take the time to reflect and see what might be the best path moving forward. And remember, we're here at the Colley Center. We're not shut down, so we have appointments available if you want to come and chat more about anything that you discussed today. So thank you all. Have a wonderful evening. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.